Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Real Talk with Real Caregivers featuring the Caregiving.com Caregiver Champions. Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of Real Talk with Real Caregivers featuring the Caregiving.com Champions. Thank you, ladies, so much for being with us today. I want to start off by introducing my co-host, Christina Keys. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you so much, Lance. So excited to be here today for this episode.
Yes, and we have a good one today. We're talking about life after caregiving, which, has affected all of you here. You've all been on that caregiving journey. But first, for our viewers and listeners, I want to take a moment and kind of go through and have you introduce yourselves. I'll start with Miss Jennifer Fink.
Hi, as Lance said, my name is Jennifer. My mom had Alzheimer's for 20 years, and she died at the very start of the pandemic from Alzheimer's. My maternal grandmother had vascular dementia. My maternal great-grandmother had dementia, type unknown, because that was back in the early 60s. And so I've been on this journey a very, very long time, and post-caregiving is not quite what I expected.
Thank you, Jennifer. Miss Patty LaFleur.
I'm Patty LaFleur, and I'm from the Seattle, Washington area, and I cared for my mom, Linda, who had younger onset mixed dementia until she passed last March. And since then, I continue to advocate and share our story to support other care partners.
Thank you, Patty. Brenda Blyce.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda. I am from London, Ontario, Canada. I was actually born a caregiver. My older brother, 7 years older than me, had cerebral palsy and just happened into that role without even realizing it at a young age. And as my parents aged, I also cared for them until they passed away 7.5 years ago from a distance. But 30 years ago, my daughter was born and she wasn't breathing when she was born, and she was severely disabled, medically fragile, unable to walk, talk, or feed herself all of her life. And sadly, she passed away last year.
Sorry. Thank you for being here, Brenda. Teresa Wilbanks.
Hi, I'm Teresa Wilbanks, and I cared for my dad for 7 years in the Tampa Bay, Florida area, and he passed at 99 in December 2020. And it wasn't pandemic related, but his last few years, we were definitely in our bubble caring for him.
Thank you, Teresa. Charletha Gayton.
Hi, I'm Charletha. I was caring for my grandmother. She was 92. I had her for 3 years. She passed away this May.
Thank you, Charletha. Christy Byrne Yates.
Hi, I'm Christy Yates, and I cared for both my parents, who both had some form of dementia. Both of them died in 2015, 7 weeks apart, and my family and I cared for them for about the last 6 years of their life. My mother had Alzheimer's, but she actually died from a recurrence of cancer. She was just approaching sort of maybe mid-range of her Alzheimer's. My dad had vascular dementia. So he died first, and then my mom died 7 weeks later.
Thank you, Christy. Teresa Robertson.
Hello, my name is Teresa. Of course, I live in Maryland. I've been a caregiver for more than 20 years to my husband, but I'm here today to talk about my journey with my aunt and godmother who passed away in 2014 from colon cancer. I was her caregiver, and I'm excited to have this opportunity to share my story today.
Thank you for being here. Mary S. Daniel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. I have been a caregiver for many family members, beginning with my grandmother back in 1984. But most recently, my husband, Steve, he was diagnosed at the age of 59 in 2013 with Alzheimer's, and he just passed away December 21st of last year. So I'm experiencing that after caregiving life right now.
Well, thank you, Mary, and thank you all for taking time out to be today to talk about a very important topic. When caregiving ends, a lot of us might have preconceived notions of what life's going to be like again or going back to the way it used to be. But, speaking from personal experience, and you may share in this experience as well, that's not often the case. So we want to talk about what your care journey was like and what it was like when it was coming to an end. Who would like to address that?
Sure. For me, I naively thought that as when I wasn't my grandmother's 24-hour care person, that my caregiving journey had ended. She moved from my house to stay with my mother the last 6 months of her life. So I actually thought, well, yeah, I get to get my life back. And yeah, it just didn't work out like that. I was still very much hands-on. She still needed me for just about everything.
Right.
All the way up until, she got really sick and passed away in May. So I thought that when I moved her, I think it was the end of June, she moved with my mom, and I was going to move away out of state. And I'm literally still in Georgia because I never could completely make that transition and not be able to know that everything was okay with my grandmother back in Georgia. So I was kind of naive about the fact that her not being in the house with me stopped me from being her caregiver, because it did it.
So what was your expectation of what it was going to be like versus what it ended up being like?
She actually made the joke, you get your life back now. And I don't even know what that looked like. I did think that they wouldn't need me as firsthand so much. I did think that I set everything up with my mom. I tried to keep everything as automated as possible. The subscriptions on Amazon for diapers, like I kept everything automated so that I really thought I could step away. But they still needed me physically hands-on. So I ended up staying at my mom's house with my grandmother, which took away some of my convenience and control. I could care for her my way when she was in my house. If I had known I would have to still care for her afterwards, it just kind of made it harder.
Right. Right. Jennifer, you had your hand up?
So my mom passed away March 31st, 2020. She had just turned 77 in January. I knew she was getting closer to the end, but she fell and broke her leg, which expedited her passing. And of course, all of this took place at the very beginning of the pandemic when nobody knew what the heck was going on, like what to think. We went into lockdown. I didn't see her for 2 weeks before she died. I was fortunate enough, the care home she was in did let us in. I saw her the day before she died, and then there was 10 of us actually outside her room the day she died. So I felt really blessed about that. But the aftermath was so different than when my father passed away in 2017. And I do not begrudge anybody any of these feelings because nobody knew what was going on, but it was kind of like a giant, oh, your mom died shrug. What was going on with this pandemic thing? And my sister didn't want to do a celebration of life. So we've never done anything 3.5 years later. It was really strange because while I was caring for her, I started a podcast for caregivers like all of us here. I never thought about what I would do with the show if and when, not if, but when she passed, because I honestly expected her to live much longer. Her mom lived to 91. And during the pandemic, when we're all sitting in our homes going, what the heck do we do? I just kept going. So it was very like anticlimactic. I mean, I have done things for my mom. I did an episode in honor of her. I wrote an essay in a book for her. So I have personally done a lot of things for her, but it kind of felt like there's nothing to do right now. We can't have a funeral. We can't do anything. So just shrug it off. And, here, like I said, 3.5 years later, my mom is cremated and she's still here with me. And I think that's probably how it's going to stay instead of, putting her with my dad. But I personally went through kind of like a little bit of a crisis because, my husband's like, you can do whatever you want. And I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. And I was like putting all this pressure on myself. Like, I got to figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life at, I think I was 54, almost 54. So it was like, oh my God. And then I finally had to mellow out and say, okay, it's fine. There's no deadline to figure it out. And it's like, I'm still trying to figure it out. And being a podcaster like yourself for caregivers and being in a community that's a slightly older demographic, it's like I can't get away from it. It's like people are always asking me opinions. Somebody asked me what I do, and they're like, I don't meet anybody that hasn't been touched by this disease or this situation, which is sad, unfortunately. But at least it's, I still haven't figured out what I'm going to do, but I'm still helping in the community, and that's what my mom would have wanted. So that's where I'm at.
That's wonderful. And I just want to say before we go to Patty that the community's better because you're in it, Jennifer. So whatever you decide to do, better include your podcasts.
Oh, it's not going anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Patty.
A big focus on my caregiving journey with my mom was finding joy and living in the moment. So it was really challenging as her end of life started to happen. So I had taken my mom to Disneyland in February of 2022, and that a month later is when she passed. And so it just really was such a shock. I thought that we were going to continue to live and love and laugh. And she got sick when we were in Disneyland, had a normal sickness. She ended up in the hospital when we got home, and then we called hospice on a Thursday, and she passed that following Monday. And so I just didn't feel like I got this time to grieve her end of life. We all know dementia and Alzheimer's, they are progressive diseases, but you expect that there's this later stage and there's these moments and this time to be on hospice, but our hospice journey was so short that I just never even felt like I got time to process her death. And so that made it such a shock. It made it people are like, how are you shocked? She had dementia. We know there's no cure, but I was shocked. And I can relate to Jennifer, where I just feel like I was so shocked, and I was the person that was caring for her. So we never had a celebration of life because that was going to fall on me. We never had this moment to celebrate and honor the person she was, because then that was more work for me to figure out what that was going to look like. And so it's just continually since she's passed, this journey of trying to figure out a balance between honoring her, but also like living my own life. So I think that I can relate to what Jennifer was saying, and like, what does that actually really look like?
Right. And I just real quick before we go to Mary, I'll say to me, Patty, from the outside, and we know each other a little bit now, it seems like you're celebrating your mom's life every single day you're online. And all the work and advocacy you're doing. Do you look at it like that?
I do feel like it's a really beautiful way to honor her and to celebrate her. But I also just wonder, like, how do I fit in the picture necessarily? And is this my journey, or am I just holding on to her journey? Right? Like, there's a piece of our journey, but then there's also a piece of like Patty, right? Like, I'm a person. So it's kind of this delicate balance of honoring my mom and then figuring out me.
Sure. And kind of having your own identity.
Mm-hmm. Figuring out what that identity is beyond caregiving. I've talked to Christina about this a lot. Like, what is that identity piece? Like, I identified as a caregiver for so long, and I'm still caring for other people in my life, but also like, what is my identity beyond that?
That makes sense. Thank you for being here, Patty, and for all the work you're doing as well. Mary.
I've had a lot of different experiences with caregiving and with grief. My mother died in 1992 of pancreatic cancer, so it was very fast, 6 months. We did have hospice in, and it was so sudden that grief was just overwhelming. I was 29 years old. My father had died when I was 17. I felt like an orphan for the very first time in my life. And I took advantage of hospice grief counseling program and went through it all 14 months and felt like it was, I always say it got me through the grief, because I think the only way you can get to the other side is to go right smack dab down the middle of it. And I've always welcomed grief. I feel like it's there for a reason. You can't love without grief when that love comes to an end. So in that experience, it was really overwhelming. It was just true grief. And, for months I would just fall to the floor and cry because it just was so unfair. She was 62 years old, had just retired, had a grandson, That was one. And she told me literally on her deathbed, my only regret is that he'll never remember me. And it's true. He doesn't remember her. But I, on that day, committed to be where she would be with him. And he is now 31 and has his own 3-month-old son that I held and fed yesterday. So that joy, I know I feel like I still do that for her, in representing her. As far as Steve goes, however, it's been a long road, 9.5 years he was sick, and Alzheimer's, it was just so different than pancreatic cancer or what, my grandmother, or those kinds of things, because it was so long. And there were times in it I just thought it would never end. It's never going to end. I'm never going to get through this. And I've written, I have on social media a lot about, if I just knew, is it days, is it months, is it years? It would be so much easier if I just knew when that was going to happen. But during the entire time, during that entire 9.5 years, I grieved the loss of him. By the end, he had been gone for years. I mean, this was not my strong, masculine athlete of a husband. This was a toddler that I was caring for. He was incontinent, he couldn't speak. And I just expressed love to him really in a way like a mother to a child. So once he passed away, there was an adjustment period of, I don't have to do this anymore. He was in a memory care center. And I was very active in that center. I even during COVID and the lockdown, I got a job as a dishwasher in the facility so I could be with him, and have worked really hard at visitation, certainly with COVID, relating to COVID in the state of Florida and across the United States. But he was gone. And so I didn't feel grief. I felt relief. I felt sadness that we had gone through this, that this had been our life for so long. I felt sadness that he was now gone and that I would certainly miss him. His children, I have 3 grown stepchildren who I'm extremely close to. I don't have any children of my own, and we have 3 grandchildren. They're grieving more than I'm grieving, because they lived out of town. They weren't here on a day-to-day basis, and they weren't living that journey every single day with me every single day. So I have to say, after a couple months of adjusting to, my car, I would get in the car and it would come up on the GPS that I'm going to Rose Castle. It's 4:30 in the afternoon and I go to Rose Castle. I had to go in and unprogram that at the end, that I don't have to go to Rose Castle today. I don't have to go to that awful place that I hated so terribly, that I hated walking into every single day because of the sadness. And I feel good. I feel happy. I feel proud of the work that I did in caring for him and the love that I showed him. I promised him on the day he was diagnosed that I would hold his hand every step of the way. And I did that. And so I want to empower other caregivers to boldly advocate for their loved ones so that they, like me, who's right here before you today, able to look back with no regrets. And I'm traveling. I just got back from Italy. I have another big trip planned in November. I'm spending time with my great nephew. I'm renovating a house. I feel really, really good. So I hope that I can give people some hope in knowing that when you do really good things and you take care of your loved ones in the way that you know is right, there's a bit of a gift to me in that, because I get that feeling every day. I've always said I kind of hold my head up a little higher, my shoulders are back a little bit farther, because I know that I fulfilled that promise that I made to him 10 years ago.
That's wonderful, Mary. I want to just touch real quick before we go to Teresa Robertson. When you say you were relieved when he had passed, somebody might hear that or be watching this thinking, well, how could you say that? Are you relieved for yourself? Are you relieved he's no longer in suffering? Or is it a little bit of both? Kind of walk us through that statement.
It is absolutely both of us, that we had to go down this journey together for so long, that it was a part of we were married 26 years. And so, a third of that was spent with him being ill. And so the relief for him, he would never, ever have wanted to live the way he was living at the end, ever. And relief for him in that it was over and that he was at peace, and relief for me that it was also over, because it was horrible to see him every single day. I said it was the saddest of all the family members that I've lost. It was absolutely the saddest experience, the saddest thing I've ever witnessed in my life. So I am relieved that it's over for all of us.
And thank you for being here and for sharing your story. Teresa Robertson.
Well, Barry, I just want to say a lot of what you said resonated with me because I've been a caregiver for more than 20 years to my husband. That's actually more than close to half my life. I've been doing that. And while I was caring for my aunt, the one thing that was clear to me was that I wanted to love on her the way she loved on me. I wanted to, I was in the journey with her, and I wanted to honor her wishes. And so at the end, to be able to sit back and say, I did everything she asked me to do. From the time that I was maybe in my early 20s, she had been preparing me. I mean, she was one of those people that she was very strategic in the way that she lived her life. And although she was 94, when they first told us that she was going into hospice, that her condition was terminal, we couldn't believe it. We thought that the problem she was having was because she had worked out too hard on the treadmill. And again, she was 94 years old. She was still living on her own. She was still driving her car. I was her caregiver in the sense that I went to every doctor's appointments. I made sure she got her medication, took her medication, did her groceries, and helped her with her billing and things like that. But she still had her wits about her. And but again, when I was in my 20s, she started preparing a folder for me. And inside that folder were all the information I would need if something ever happened to her. Her life insurance policies, the funeral home. And when we were told she was going into hospice, I still remember I'd never had any experience with hospice before, so I had no idea what to expect. When we left the doctor's office, we went to Target, and hospice called us within an hour. I was shocked. I felt like they were trying to take her away from me, but they met with us the next day. They gave me another folder with all the things that would help me to prepare, and I read everything they gave me. And it really helped me to understand the stages that a person goes through as they're transitioning. But along with the folder that she had given me, I knew exactly what she wanted me to do. And so when she was no longer able to care for herself or to speak on her behalf, I knew her wishes because she explained them to me. And when her time came, it was the most peaceful experience. I mean, the days leading up to it, were frightening. Of course, I was calling hospice a lot. I needed them to come in and help me. But the moment that she passed away, I was able to stand by her bedside and hold her hand and tell her how much I loved her. And I just kept saying it over and over again until I noticed she wasn't breathing anymore. And after that was over, there was a sense of relief, but of course it was also heartbreaking. But I've committed my life since then to be bold and live my life like she would. So every year on Mother's Day, instead of being sad, I commit to finding something that I've never done before and doing something new, to take on an adventure of some sort, so that I can honor the way she lived her life by the way I live my life. And so this podcast, this time together is so important, so that people can get a sense of everyone's journey is so different. But that's my story. And I'm still in caregiving mode today with my husband. So my grief after caregiving was a little different because I had to go right back I was continuing to care for my husband. I really didn't have a lot of time to grieve. So it came in stages along the way. But every time I would feel that pain, the pains of grief, I would remember the joy of having her as part of my life and how transformative it was for me to grow up having an aunt like her and a godmother like her. So there you go.
Thank you, Teresa. I just want to touch it real quick before I pass to Christina here. When you mentioned, she prepared you and you knew her wishes, how many of you knew what your loved one's wishes were before you got to that stage? Okay, so just about half or so. Patty, you're shaking your head no. Do you want to touch on that real quick, Patty?
Yeah, my mom got diagnosed with younger onset dementia. And so we just hadn't had that conversation. Her diagnosis came as a complete shock to us. And so that wasn't something that we had talked about, because we expected that her and my dad were going to enjoy retirement and go on these trips. And so it wasn't something that we planned for. I knew her and I knew her heart. And so I went on what I thought was what she would want in that moment, but we had never had those conversations.
Was your dad able to help with any of the input?
My dad also had gotten diagnosed with dementia, and he had passed 6 months before my mom. And so we also didn't have that conversation. I knew his wishes because he was very clear about that. Once my mom got diagnosed, we had those conversations, and I've had those conversations now. I know my wishes and my husband's wishes and all my best friends' wishes, but I didn't know my mom's wishes.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Christina?
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Yeah, a lot of you know I cared for my mother for 10 years. She had a stroke. It was interesting because when my mom had her stroke, they gave her 1% chance to live. And for the first 30 days, we didn't know if she was going to live or not. And so we got 10 years together, right? And me and my mom had a lot of end of life conversations. A lot of them. At one point, she had asked me, like, what do you want your life to look like after I pass? And I even made a vision board for her. We had a whole conversation about it. We really, really, she told me what her wishes were for me, that, I would travel and I would live in her home, all of these great things. And, as she started getting sicker and sicker, it was Thanksgiving of last year. And, we went to the hospital and we said, we're going to try one last time to try to make it so we don't have to put you on hospice. And, we celebrated Thanksgiving in the hospital. The next day she was put on hospice and I brought her home, and me and her had so many talks about end of life, that I was going to be able to be by her side and hold her hand. And, we were able to be together when it ended, but I think I was in shock, still. And all of these things that me and mom had talked about, I really, there's a part of me that grieved my life as a caregiver because I didn't have that life anymore. It was all about my mother, right? And so I thought I'd be excited. And then my mom passed, and it's okay, what do I want to do? I don't know who I am anymore. 10 years of being my mom's caregiver, I was I used to like photography. I used to play softball. Well, I'm 54 years old. My body's not in shape to play in softball anymore, and so I don't know what I'm doing, and I thought I would be able to experience all of these things. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I go do something that I remember the first time I went away for the weekend, right, with my girls, and I didn't have to plan for care. I didn't have to check in. I didn't have to set aside money to pay for extra care, and I went on this trip, and it was weird. I felt guilty. I'm still learning how to experience joy, right? But whenever I do experience joy, I bring my mom into that and I say, thank you for everything you taught me, right? So she just passed in December, so it's still really hard to feel anything without sharing that with her, because she was my life, and I know a lot of you have experienced some of those same things too. So yeah, it definitely was different. I thought I'd be just happy, joyous, and free and feel like I did a really great job and, I could move forward. And no, I'm still paying off the debt I incurred while paying for her care. I'm still, all of these things, but it's a day at a time. But like Mary said, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I did what I didn't know how to do. And I was a good daughter, and my mom was grateful for that. And I'm grateful I got to do it. If somebody said to me, Christina, would you do it over again, knowing how hard it was? I would do it over and over and over again, knowing how hard it was. So, but I really would like to hear from actually Christy. Again, if you could tell us a little bit about what your care journey, what it was like coming to an end, what you were, what you expected, and what it actually was like, that'd be fabulous.
Sure. I hear you. I would do it over again as well. And I'm glad, Lance, you brought up the conversation around making plans. And my parents had done that long before they were diagnosed with anything. And that's something that was a real gift to me because I knew what they wanted. And they both did not want to live with either me or my brother or my sister. They wanted, if they needed to if they could not live on their own, they were fine with going to assisted living or memory care. And as it turned out, that's what they ultimately needed. Because they both had dementia at the same time. My mom kept mixing up my dad's medication. It was not safe for them to be together without 24-hour care, but they had an insurance policy that didn't pay for anything but insurance or assisted living. So I was kind of stuck. But for me, the hardest part was I still had 2 kids at home. The year that my parents died was the year my son graduated high school and went off to college. My daughter was in high school. I was working full time as a school psychologist. My dad died literally the weekend before I had to go back to school in the school district. And then 7 weeks later, my mom died. I took some time with my mom because I took family medical leave at that point, right around Labor Day, because so we're coming up to the anniversary of her death, but she died on her birthday. And so that's also an interesting thing. I have to think about that sometimes every year. But I didn't take my full time away, right? I mean, she died sort of early in my FMLA. And I was getting pressure to come back. And I understand it. It's tough in schools and they needed me back. But I wish I'd taken more time because I was transitioning on so many levels, right? I was now, having one leave. And that was a real interesting thing when my dad had already died in July, and my son was ready to go off to college, and he was going to go 2,000 miles away to college. And the weekend before we were going to take him, my husband and I were going to take him, we live in California, we're going to take him to Ohio. My mom, that's when we discovered she had pleural effusion, which was a result of cancer in her body. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do? Because what do I do? Do I go with my son? And I really had to lean into what would my mom be telling me to do if she wasn't in this situation? And she'd be saying, you go with your kid, Christy, you go with your son. So I did. I called everybody I could to make sure that they could pop in and be with her. Even though she was at an assisted living, she had wonderful care there. But so those things happened. And I guess my point is, what happened for me is I just was so busy getting back. I didn't have time to grieve, is my point. I really didn't. I grieved in very different ways, but I had also been grieving for like 5 years. So that anticipatory grief was something that was really huge for me and really impacted who I was as a parent. But man, I didn't have time. I ended my FMLA early. I went back to work. It's hard work. It was, and then I had all my parents' stuff. I still had all their stuff. So I still have some of their stuff. And that was really hard. And I just remember crying in the living room with a trash can. Like, what do I throw away? What do I keep? I don't know. It was really very hard. So it took years. And then meanwhile, so I'm going through this time period, and I just have to say, I'll wrap up. Then my daughter went off to college. So I kind of went, now I'm still going through I'm finally getting to the happy, because I took early retirement eventually. We are empty nesters. We're having a good time. I'm trying new things, and I'm, writing and sharing stories, but it does take time, and grief comes in waves for me. It just comes in waves. So that's my story.
And the work that you do now, Christy, the way you share your story and your journey is so helpful for so many caregivers. I love the things you share on social media about your journey then and now. So thank you for that work that you do. Sure. Teresa, do you want to share?
Yes, thank you. So as I said, my dad passed in December 2020, and he was 99. So when he was 98, and I think that was about when the pandemic hit, and my husband and I took over all care. we were just concerned about him. Obviously, he was vulnerable. And I started to really see what was happening with caregivers and their family members who would go into the hospital and how they weren't there with them and they were passing. And I just, it caused so much concern that I brought hospice in. So dad had been diagnosed with interstitial lung disease. So he qualified, but his mom lived to be 104. And I expected he was on that same trajectory and had no expectation that, that his death was imminent, but thought I couldn't imagine what it would be like to have him in the hospital and I wasn't there with him and he was alone and all of that was just so much. So I knew that if we had hospice services, because I had them for mom, that we would have a nurse coming in, access to a doctor. If he needed medical care, we could manage that without, him going maybe to a doctor's appointment, a visit where he might, contract something. So we brought hospice in and it was probably 7 months, and then he started to develop something that was concerning. The doctor had visited, and what had happened that I know now, didn't know then, was he had a silent heart attack. So fluid was building, and we didn't visit his regular doctor. His regular doctor after the fact is the one who told me what happened when I described the progression. So it was sudden. And to say that he was 99 at this point, and it was sudden to a lot of people, that doesn't make sense, but it was. I did not see it coming. And it was just within a couple of days. That day before he was painting, he painted landscapes. He was painting. That morning, he got up, he made his bed, he made his coffee. We could tell he was in distress. And I called the hospice and the nurse came over right away. She didn't tell me what was happening. I think that if I had communicated my expectations to the doctor and to the nurse that I want to know everything, then maybe she would have communicated that. In hindsight, it was obvious. I knew he probably wouldn't survive the day. So we had hours with him, but I would just say, I wish I had done that. I also wish I had 2 doulas in mind. I had not reached out to them. I wish I had contracted doula services. So I would have had some different conversations ahead of time. I would have had someone else to reach out to. I would have, and these aren't regrets. I won't say they're regrets. I'm just saying, I think that that day would have gone differently had I been in touch with a death doula. So, and then after dad passed, that void was immense. It was, you wake up every morning and the first thought is, oh, I need to go check on dad. And then the realization that he's not there. That was really hard. And like Christina said, getting back in touch with passions. I coach and work with family caregivers. Like I know the steps that I should take. It's not that easy. Like Christina said, what are my passions? What did I enjoy? How do I get back in touch with all of that? So my husband and I did a 3.5-month tent camping trip. And I will say that's not possible for everyone, but getting into a different space, someplace where I wasn't caregiving. Now I would say at mid-50s, tent camping, I don't recommend it, but it gave us an opportunity. We were working while we were out, but it gave us an opportunity to regroup. And that helped so much to figure out what our future looked like. It's hard to look back and realize how he was 99 and we generally knew, but we hadn't talked about details because we really didn't think it would happen as soon as it did. So we didn't have a plan and our whole life was devoted to caring for him. And all of a sudden, all these other opportunities opened up and it was frightening. It was a void, not just in losing him, but now what for us? So yeah, we figured out that we do want to live our dream of traveling and working. And now we've built this caravan that I'm sitting in now. And we're trying to make that work where we travel. But it's taken me 2.5 years to feel like full joy, to feel back to myself. It's taken time for me to not have that cloud of hopelessness. It's helplessness. It's worry, constant worry, because there was something there even after dad passed that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was that when is the other shoe going to drop? There was still that being all consumed with life that's leading to death. Like it was a lot I'm just now starting to not be all consumed with that. I still have dreams. I'll wake up in a complete panic with the overwhelming worry. It all comes rushing back. I can read my journals to see that it was real. Those feelings were real because I'm starting to distance from that, which is, I feel healthy. But yes, it was hard. Last thing I'm going to say is I can remember, and I've talked to Christina about this. feeling that I won't survive this. I'm in my mid-50s, dad in his late 90s, and I'm not going to outlive him. And then thinking I don't even want to, like, this is just so hard, but I can't leave him. So, and I can't, murder-suicide was not an option. So, I mean, that's how challenging it was. The strategies that I developed to help me survive caregiving and find gratitude and set boundaries, all of that helped me post caregiving. I stopped using them. I thought, well, I don't need to worry about mindfulness anymore. All these things that I did while I was a caregiver to survive, I don't need that anymore. But then life is hard. I did need them. And as I started to reincorporate them back into my life, that helped as well. And I think if I hadn't done that, I'd still be in that state of, I don't know what it was exactly. I won't call it depression, but I needed those strategies to help me just navigate life again.
Thank you, Teresa. Before we move to Brenda, I just want to ask a quick question about this big tent camping trip. Did you have Wi-Fi?
So that was the big challenge. Okay, so we had to go to cafes. Now we have Starlink, but I will say that working remotely was very, very challenging. We did not often have Wi-Fi and had to go find it, but now we have Starlink, so we can be as remote as we like and be able to work.
Okay.
I did want to say about the end of life doula too. I love that you brought up the end of life doula. We were fortunate enough to have an end of life doula too that I had started working with about a year before my mother passed, and she was so incredibly helpful towards the end in educating not only me but the caregivers that were helping us on what to expect and how to walk through those last 30 days. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to go to Brenda, and then we'll get to our round robin questions here real briefly because I know we're running short on time. But Brenda, did you want to share?
Thank you. I could repeat everything that everyone has said. I know nothing but being a caregiver for almost 30 years of my life, caring for my daughter. She was my sole purpose. And I knew anticipatory grief and grief itself from the moment she was born. The moment she was born, she wasn't breathing. And I immediately grieved those dreams that I had of the child that I knew I was going to have, that I thought I was going to have. I grieved the life and the abilities that she wasn't going to have. I grieved that she would never say, I love you. But I knew she did. We had the most unbreakable bond, and it was so palpable to so many people. And the first couple of years of her life, I didn't know that I was going to be able to handle it because she screamed because of the seizures and the medications and the brain damage. She screamed constantly. And then all of a sudden, she became this flower that blossomed, and she brought so much joy into our lives. And she cried no longer. She cried once when she was 8 and had hip surgery. And that was another thing. Every time I subjected her to blood work or medical procedures, it was grief all over again, because as parents, we're supposed to protect our children from harm. And here I was subjecting it to her. We didn't have a choice. At a very young age, like all the doctors would say at every appointment was what she couldn't do, the milestone she wasn't reaching, and what she would never be able to do. So every single time I took her to an appointment, it was negative. And it's really hard to stay out of a grief space. I didn't call it grief then. I didn't recognize it as that then. But it's really hard to stay out of that grief space. And I attribute my switch to her dentist, who we saw when she was 2.5. And he examined her and he said to me, she's perfect. Keep up the good work. And it took every ounce of energy for me not to cry in that appointment. I had to ask him to repeat what he said. I was in so much shock. And I got to the van, I loaded her in, and I bawled my eyes out before we drove away. And that was it was a light switch for me that, yes, she was perfect. And she brought so much joy. Like, I was watching videos of her the other day and I actually couldn't cry because her laugh was just so infectious that still I can't help but laugh along with her. We could never really tell what her developmental age was because she couldn't communicate, but she laughed at the most appropriate jokes. She had her favorite jokes. She used a communication switch to communicate those. But then at the same time, I'm caring for my daughter. My parents are aging and they're out of province, quite a distance away. And I'm also helping to advocate for them. And my mom fell very ill and I had to get care for my daughter and rush out there and advocate for her. And my dad then hurt himself and ended up in a nursing facility, which I had to advocate for. And then all of a sudden, one morning, my mom didn't wake up. And I went out there for her funeral. And 4 days after I got back from her funeral, my dad died. So that grieving process, I think, hit me actually a lot harder. I don't even want to say that, than my daughter. But I think there was the distance that I'd had from them for 30 plus years contributed to my guilt. I knew that I was a really great daughter. I knew that they appreciated all that I did for them from a distance, but not being able to spend that last time with them. And I had plans to go see them, but a few months before they died, but I had to cancel that because Nikki was in the hospital. So there was that grief. I after my dad died and I got home, I could barely function. I would get up and get my daughter to her day program, go back home, go to bed, and get up and go pick her up. I've not been able to do that for Nikki since she died. And I've had such compounded grief since she died. I don't even know how I'm functioning. Our family dog of 15 years died in my arms exactly 2 weeks after Nikki did, and Nikki died in my arms as well. I've been going through a divorce for 10 years, which finally just finalized. So all of a sudden, I'm just me. Like I've lost my whole family. And I've had to sell my house. So I had to immediately get into the purging and packing. Like you said, Christy, this is my daughter's stuff. Like, what do I do with this? And losing the community I raised her in, the house I raised her in, losing her wheelchair, her bed. Like, she's not those things. I know that. But there's so many fun things that are associated. Those wheels were her freedom. The bed was where she had so much joy and brought so much. I could hear her throughout the house with her laughter, her squeal. She was the biggest fan of Shania Twain. So she was literally the happiest person on the face of this planet. And what I'm struggling with now is, how do I keep that going? How do I honor her, and who am I? And I really am struggling with finding the joy, because she was my joy. She was my reason for going. Her care was hard, but she made it so much easier. She was the most patient and tolerant and happy person ever. So it's been a difficult year, and leading up to her passing, she had had so many close calls all of her life. When she was 15, it was a significant close call, and we were told she would live to 14 or 15 years old. And when she died last year, she was 29. And I'm told repeatedly by all of the healthcare professionals that she doubled her life because of me. And I have no doubt in my mind that I was an incredible mom, an incredible voice, an incredible advocate for her. And we had a love that was unspoken. There was no words required. Obviously, I talked to her a lot. She couldn't express her love for me in words, but so many people would say to me, I wish you could see what we could see when she looks at you. And at the end, we did get palliative care in. And she'd had seizures all her life, but they were never severe. And at the end, they became very severe. She was in hospital already. and it was seizures. And she'd had problems with her lungs and her pancreas and all of this during all of her life. Never thought it would be seizures. I'd avoided the death conversation all of her life because she's my child, right? So I didn't know what to expect. I'd never, ever seen a dead body before. And she took her last breath in my arms. And it was difficult. The anticipation of it coming up was just as difficult, if not more, than her actual passing. My biggest fears were losing her. If she were to die, me not being with her, and me going before, because I had no idea how she would survive without me. So they were all my biggest fears. But out of all of them, I'm just happy I was with her at the very end.
Yeah. Well, she was very fortunate to have a mother like you. That's for sure. I want to go to Charlitha real quick, and I know we got to wrap up here, so I just have a couple more questions. Charlitha?
You're probably going to ask. Anyway, I just wanted to say before we left that thank you to everyone who shared their stories. I haven't actually taken the time to grieve my grandmother yet, so that's why I couldn't talk to it. But hearing everybody else's stories, I thought that I was coming on here to share my story more so than what I got today. So thank you all for your stories. Thank you all for your strength. I haven't traveled that road yet. I avoided the funeral, but it was very helpful to hear you guys' stories today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for contributing your story too, Charlitha. Real quick before we wrap up, I'll just echo Charlitha's sentiments. We appreciate all of you, being vulnerable and sharing your stories. For some, it's harder than others, but for all of us, hopefully these stories will benefit the people that we're trying to benefit by having you on here with these stories. So in closing, I just want to ask two questions. Just take a few brief moments, and then Christina and I will wrap up the show. Share one comment, positive, negative, or both, that you received as a caregiver from others who were not in the caregiving, time of their lives at that moment, that was either positive, negative, or that really stuck with you. I'll start with Patty.
I think one of the biggest things is that people would say to me that I was so lucky that I could care for my mom, or that it was such like I was doing right by her. But it wasn't something that was a choice for me. My mom had gotten sick. My dad had cared for her until he couldn't care for her anymore. And he ended up in the hospital, and she had to have support somewhere. And so it wasn't a choice. It was that someone needed to step in that moment. And I know that people are well-meaning and saying like, what an honor you got to do that, and how beautiful that you got to do that. But it really wasn't something that was a choice for me. And so that kind of dismissed some of the feelings I had in my caregiving journey, and dismissed that piece around that. Now I can reflect, and I'm so thankful, and I have no regrets, as others shared. And I know that I honored my mom and I did everything I could. But I think it's important to just name that people don't always choose this journey. And sometimes it's just something that happens to them. And would I do it over again? Yes. Would I yeah. And I didn't want to be in my early 30s doing this, right? I didn't want my friends still have their parents. They are grandparents to their children. They are going on trips with them. It wasn't something that people in their early 20s their moms were getting a dementia diagnosis. So it was not something that I would have ever chosen to be going down that path, especially at the age I was.
I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong or don't agree with this, but it to me, caregiving chooses us. We don't choose caregiving, right? And I think that's one of the biggest misnomers that outsiders have that haven't gone through it. Patty, the second question for you is, if you could go back and talk to yourself however many years ago when you were in the throes of it, what's something you'd want to tell your younger self in the middle of your caregiving journey?
Oh, I would have told myself to get support as soon as possible, to look for support groups, to create my tribe. I tried to do it all myself because I didn't have family that was able to help me. It was just me. My sister was far away. My dad had his own health things. And so I just kind of felt like, okay, I have to handle this all myself. And I would have found support groups earlier. I would have found support systems and I found support groups, but I was the youngest person there by 20, 30 years. And so I was like, okay, this isn't really helpful. Now I'm helping other people. And that I wish I would have found these resources and these younger people that were going through it like I was.
Yeah,
I think all of us could agree that if we could have started with one thing, it would have been a support group right off the bat and a care coach. And those two things, if we were able to start our care journey over again, I think we all would agree those would be the things we started with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mary, you had your hand up. Did you want to answer?
I did. I just wanted to say that I think being a caregiver, as you just said, it's sort of something that's thrust on us, whether we like it or not. I had the opportunity to really sort of be out there in the community and especially during COVID and work. And so people have said to me, that, I'm different than anybody else. I'm a patient advocate by trade. So because of that, you knew what to do and how to do it and all of those things. And I tell people all the time, and I mean this, I'm not special. We all have the ability to do this. We may not think that we do, but every single one of us has what it takes to do this by taking it every single day, one at a time, making the very best decision that you can make today. Tomorrow, there may be a different decision that's the best decision that you make. But if you do this every single day, making the best decisions with the best heart, you too can do this and be successful at it and be able to look back with no regrets.
Did you have any comments that were given to you when you were caring for your husband that was positive, negative, or?
I had so many positive comments. People were so supportive, and people, I was lucky that I am surrounded by a wonderful tribe, as I've heard the term today, that I had family and friends to support me, and they all were incredibly supportive. And I absolutely agree that a support group is, if you don't have a support group, please get one. The value of support groups is there are people that have already gone through what you are going through, so they can help you where you are, and then you can do the same to the folks that are behind you. So you can contribute as much as you gain. And without that, I can't imagine where I'd be. So I'm a huge proponent of support groups.
What would you go back and tell yourself at the beginning of your journey?
One day at a time, one day at a time. Love him, hold him, make him feel as if he's the most important person in the world. And I was able to do that. And not only was that a gift to him, that was a gift to me too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mary. Teresa, you had your hand up?
Yes. I wanted to mention that one of my favorite quotes is, "I'm tired of trying to act stronger than I feel." Because throughout my care journey, people always like to remark about how strong they think I am, or how amazing it is that I'm so strong. And when on the inside, I always feel so vulnerable. And so what I want to say to caregivers are, you don't have to be, you don't have to pretend to be stronger than you are. It's okay to not be okay. And I echo what they said about finding a care support group that you can become a part of, or find a really good friend that you can talk to and confide in about how you're feeling. But make space in your life to process what you're feeling and what you're going through. Journal if you have to. Take time to be quiet so you can listen to your own heart and figure out how you feel, and so you can make sense of the world around you.
Absolutely. And I would just say, I think by recognizing that and accepting that you don't have to be strong is being strong.
Right. And I think, everybody talked about people saying, oh, you're doing so much great stuff for your mom. You're doing all of that. Here's what I would like to say to other caregivers, and I wish I would have known. It's okay to listen to those voices and for them to be those voices when we're at home feeling like we're failing. Because as family caregivers, if the person we're caring for isn't getting better, there's a part of us that feels like we're failing at times, right? So it's okay to use those voices because you are doing a good job. And those thoughts, like Teresa talked about, it's okay to not be okay. Those thoughts are normal part of caregiving at times. And that's why it's so important to find a support group so you can hear other folks that are walking the same journey as you, that are feeling the same things. Because I'll tell you what, I've met a lot of people in the industry who wound up being caregivers, who were in the industry, in the care space, knew all the logical stuff. I knew all the logical stuff, but they weren't prepared for the emotions. They weren't prepared for the feelings. And so it's very important that you have that space, that sacred space that you can say, man, I am feeling like a failure today. And I don't know how to accept all these things that people are saying. I'm a strong daughter because I am just like a 54-year-old woman who logically knows that, okay, it's okay. But I'm also an 8-year-old little girl who's just saying, please don't let my mommy die. Right. So I just want to say to any of the caregivers out there, our normal is different. Some of the things we're feeling is different, and finding a support group to have that safe space and believe those people when they say you are doing an amazing job, even though you're stepping up to doing it for love, you are doing a good job.
Right. We'll go to Jennifer and then to Christy, and then we'll close with Brenda. Jennifer?
So I echo support groups. I actually facilitate one now. I went to grief support after my dad died and realized that it only addressed part of the situation I was dealing with. So I then found the Alzheimer's Association and their support groups. Some of the people in the group that I facilitate actually participate in more than one. That wasn't an option really very much back before the pandemic for me. But one of the things that I really wish I had done, and I'm gonna think on this one after we're done here, is I really wish I had stayed in therapy because of the financial hit of caring for my mom, because I had my own business. We ended up losing our health insurance for a couple of years, and obviously I couldn't continue with the therapy. And I really think that was a mistake, because I think there's things going on today that might be echoes of not dealing with a lot of crap when I was caring for my mom. And lastly, I would really like people to stop saying, oh, it's such an honor to care for your parents, or it's an honor to care for those who cared for you, because there are a lot of us that is just baloney. My mom was extremely difficult. I had to make decisions I knew went against what she wanted. She wanted to live in her home forever, but she didn't want to be a burden to me. Hello, mutually exclusive. She didn't want anybody to help her. I mean, it was just a constant uphill battle. And I did the best job I could. I have no regrets. But it's still painful because I know I did all these things she didn't want me to do. So that's where the therapy might be a good idea.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Christy?
So I love what you just said, Jennifer. I often say to people, I talk a lot about sandwich generation in particular. And so what sometimes I hear, though, are people who are tasked with taking care of their parents, and they didn't have a great relationship to begin with. So I have felt a lot of love for my mom and dad, and I hear that from so many of you, but there are people out there who are caring for their parents, and it's not that way. And yet there's still ways to lean into love for yourself. Like, I'm going to do something that I feel good about doing. Love for your children, that you're role modeling. This is what compassion and action looks like. So there's a lot to that. But I did want to say one thing, Lance. My parents were wonderful in that they always said thank you to me. They were still aware enough where they were in their diseases that they were cognizant of what was going on. And they were so beautiful. And they'd say, oh, thank you so much, Christy. And it was great. And again, that role modeling. I was blessed that I had people who were that way. But I did have one person say to me, you should be taking your mom out of assisted living and putting her in your house and do whatever it takes to do that, because you're doing the wrong thing. And I thought, you don't know my mom the way I know my mom. She gave me a map. And it was hurtful. And so I also then kind of in my work, try not to judge people for how they're choosing to caregive, because we all have different reasons why we do what we do. And there are multiple right answers to most questions. So, if it works for you, this is what needs to happen. There's more than one way. So that's what I wanted to share.
Well, Christy, real quick before we go to Brenda, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Yeah, I would tell myself what a lot of people have said. Build that team, because I was definitely the person who thought I had to do everything, because I thought I was supposed to know everything and do everything, and that I was strong, and I am, and I did know what to do. It was still really hard. So I would have, I did work with a therapist at one point, and that was really important for me to kind of deal with all of the different things that were going on. So that was incredible. But I think a support group would have been really good for me. But I felt so squeezed, I didn't have time for that. I was doing everything. So, but that would have been good. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you, Christy. Brenda?
I'll make it brief. Advice to others of what to say or not to say, or what to do or not to do with those who are caregiving or grieving. Don't ghost them. Especially when that caregiver thinks, or the person who's grieving thinks, that you're a really good friend. That puts them into more grief, compounds the grief. If you can't manage, if there's something going on with your life and you can't manage your friend's grief, your family member's grief, communicate. We'll understand. But don't put us in a situation where we think, what did we do wrong? And my 2 pieces of advice for caregivers, if I were to have to go back: always trust your gut. Always trust your gut instincts. And it's okay to cry. I was often told, don't cry, be strong. And that's such a contradiction, that it shows strength to be vulnerable and cry. And often when you don't show emotion, then the healthcare professionals think you're coping really well and don't need the extra supports. So it's okay to cry. It's okay to have emotions about what you're going through and what you're feeling.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say real quick, if that's okay, Lance,
Yeah.
To the caregivers that are out there, there are 53 million family caregivers out there who are on a care journey right now. As you can see, there's many of us on this call right now who are recovering from that caregiver journey, or our caregiver journey has ended. And it is a process that we have to walk through, that we have to learn to walk through. Just like you're not alone on your care journey, you're not alone on the journey after your loved one passes either. So again, please find folks like us and folks that are on the same path and get with them and find that support you need, because just like you don't have to do your care journey alone, you don't have to do the caregiver recovery alone either.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Brenda. And thank all of you for taking the time out today and for all the advocacy and all of the work that you're doing. I like to say you're caregiver champions, but you're heroes to us. And, keep doing this great work you're doing, because you're helping people who are going through what we all went through at some point, get through a really difficult time. And, now there's all these wonderful resources and podcasts and, online support groups and all these great things that wasn't there for a lot of us back when we were going through this journey. And it just, I think, is a testament to how important it is, because all of us are here doing what we're doing after going through that journey, when we could all go do other things if we chose to. So thank you all, and we look forward to continuing to have these conversations. Thank you for joining us today at Real Talk with Real Caregivers, featuring the Caregiving.com Caregiver Champions.